The brutal murder of a 10-year-old girl left her community outraged and demanding justice. Will the truth behind Victoria Martens' death ever come to light?
There's a little girl inside the house.
How old?
How old is your daughter? 10. Oh, yeah, she's 10.
Police discovered 10-year-old Victoria Martens' body dismembered and on fire inside an apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
It was August 2016. I got a text early in the morning from a source of mine who said this is the worst homicide he had ever seen and that a child was mutilated.
The night turned the moment the 911 line opened. A woman's voice, shaking, out of breath, telling the dispatcher her daughter wasn't breathing. In the background, muffled movement, footsteps, something being dragged, voices that were too calm for the emergency being described. The dispatcher tried to guide her through CPR, but even through the phone, something fell off. The responses were delayed, directions weren't followed, and the tone in the room didn't match the panic in the words. Within moments, units were redirected to apartment 208, lights flashing down Montgomery Boulevard. Fire, paramedics, and officers all responding to what should have been a straightforward medical call. But when first responders stepped inside the home, the scene froze them. The temperature in the room, the condition of the child, the adults standing there, too still, too controlled, offering fragments of a story that didn't fit the reality in front of them. That 911 call didn't just report an emergency. It opened the first crack in a story that would unravel piece by piece, revealing questions no one was prepared for. Tonight, we go back to that moment, to the urgency in a mother's voice, to the confusion on the line, and to the decisions made in the minutes before help arrived. And as we begin, hold on to this. If the call had come just a little earlier, would anything have been different? Because the truth of what happened in that apartment isn't in the call itself. It's in everything that led up to it. Before we begin tonight, I want to speak to you parent to parent, adult to adult, human to human. Because after everything you will hear today, after walking through every moment this child never survived, there's a truth we can't escape. Children don't get to choose the adults who raise them. They don't get to choose the homes they grow up in. They don't get to leave when things become unbearable. They can't run, can't protect themselves, can't fight back. A child's entire world, their entire future, sits in the hands of the grown-ups around them. And when those hands fail them, the child doesn't get a second chance. Some of you watching right now are parents. Some are grandparents. Some are teachers. Some are simply people with a soft spot for children, the kind of heart that aches when you see a little one in pain. And I know that there are going to be moments in this story when you have to stop, look away, breathe through it. Moments that will make you imagine your own child, your niece, your nephew, the kid next door. Moments that will make you think, what if someone had stepped in sooner? What if someone had spoken up? Most of the cases we tell here, they never make it to Netflix. Not because they aren't important, but because they are too real, too raw, too heartbreaking for platforms that want polished tragedy instead of the painful truth. But these children deserve to be remembered. Their stories deserve to be told with care, with dignity, with the seriousness they were denied in life. And that's why we do what we do. Every episode on this channel takes hours, days of digging, verifying, cross-checking, and piecing together the reality behind the headlines. Because if these children never had a voice, the least we can do is make sure their silence is heard. At the end, if tonight shook you, if it reminded you to hug your child a little tighter, if it made you look at the kids in your life with more tenderness, more awareness, more gratitude, then I ask you, from my heart to yours, please subscribe. Not for entertainment, not for numbers, but because there's another child out there right now whose story risks being forgotten. Another case no one is telling. Another little life slipping through the cracks. Share this video so we could reach more audiences and perhaps help some who need the information we will share here today. Be sure to comment, as your insightful thoughts could be just what a child out there may depend on for survival. And maybe by staying here with us, by listening, by caring, You help bring just a little more light to the places where children are still hurting. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for remembering. And wherever you are tonight, please check on a child you love. November 13th, 2018, 10:42 p.m. A voice trembled through the Albuquerque 911 dispatcher's headset, raw with panic. Please, help, something's happened to my daughter. The words were broken, desperate, a cry that would ripple far beyond that apartment. For the dispatcher, the night suddenly shifted. For the city, nothing would ever feel the same. By the time officers arrived, the ordinary quiet of the North Valley neighborhood had been shattered. Red and blue lights bounced off brick walls and parked cars, casting fractured reflections across the darkened street. Inside apartment 3B, the scene that greeted them defied comprehension. Victoria Martens, only 10 years old, lay motionless, partially wrapped in a burning blanket. The faint smoke stung the eyes, clung to the hair, and carried a scent of charred fabric mixed with something more subtle, more tragic, the absence of laughter that should have filled this home that night. A birthday balloon sagged against the wall, the helium long gone, a silent witness to the horror. The officers paused. They had responded to domestic disputes before, to violent arguments, even a tragedy. But this was something different. One whispered, almost to himself, "How does something like this happen in the place a child should feel safest?" Michelle Martens, Victoria's mother, stood nearby, her face a careful mask of shock and confusion, hands trembling, her eyes avoiding the reality in front of her. Fabian Gonzalez, her boyfriend, shifted uncomfortably, jaw tight, posture tense. Jessica Kelly, a family acquaintance, hovered with a nervous energy, her gaze darting around the room. Their presence was immediate, undeniable, yet the story behind their involvement remained hidden, threaded with mystery. Victoria had been more than just a child. She was birthday candles and chocolate frosting, the giggle that echoed through the halls, the little hands that clutched a stuffed animal tightly at bedtime. Her absence, her silence, filled the apartment in a way that words could never capture. Officers moved carefully, cataloging evidence while a knot of unease settled in their stomachs. Every overturned chair, every crayon on the floor, every singed edge of the blanket told part of the story, but even they could not see the whole picture yet. As investigators began their methodical work, tiny details emerged. A faint smell of alcohol lingered in the air. A small piece of torn paper lay near the blanket. Each element, small on its own, suggested layers of events that had unfolded behind closed doors. Events that would later reveal a betrayal so intimate it shook the very concept of parental trust. And yet, in the midst of horror, human empathy broke through. First responders recounted Victoria's small, beloved belongings, her favorite doll, the sticker she had clutched in the corner of the room. For the officers, it was impossible not to see her, not to remember their own children, to imagine a life so abruptly ended. That human connection, the recognition of innocence lost, heightened the tension in the room. The night stretched into hours. Photographs were taken. Statements were whispered. Each movement was measured, precise. But no procedure, no step, could undo the loss, could erase the questions that hung in the smoke-filled air. And there, in the quiet between sirens and whispers, the first chilling thought took hold. How does a child's own mother allow, or even witness, the suffering inflicted upon her daughter? What unseen forces, what secret motivations had led to this moment? Long before the night of August 23, 2016, before the 911 call, before officers stepped into that apartment, there were signs. Not loud ones, not the kind that caused anyone to rush for help. They were quiet, scattered, easy for a busy world to brush aside. But together, they formed a pattern that would later reveal just how long Victoria Martens had been living in danger. Victoria was the kind of child who tried hard not to worry anyone. Teachers remembered her as polite, gentle, always trying to blend in. She loved glitter. She loved drawing hearts on scrap paper. She adored her younger brother. Nothing about her made people think she was fighting a private battle inside her own home. But as investigators began to peel back the layers, they realized the home where Victoria slept was not a place of protection. It was a place where boundaries didn't exist, where adults drifted in and out, where strangers were allowed too close, and where Michelle Martens, the one person who should have been her refuge, made choices that pushed her daughter deeper into harm. Michelle's statements to police later revealed decisions that stunned even seasoned detectives. She described arrangements, moments where men were invited into the apartment, with the understanding that Victoria was part of what they came for. Her admissions weren't emotional. There was no panic in her tone. That calmness unsettled investigators more than any shout ever could. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. But Michelle wasn't the only adult shaping that household. Two other figures hovered around Victoria's life. Fabian Gonzalez, Michelle's boyfriend, whose moods would shift with every substance in the system, and Jessica Kelly, Fabian's cousin, volatile, unpredictable, and known for disappearing into drug binges that left destruction behind her. Neighbors later recalled small moments, sounds that didn't fit a home with children, doors slamming at odd hours, sudden arguments, footsteps pacing, but nothing that seemed urgent enough to dial for help. One neighbor remembered Victoria stepping outside once, just for a moment, holding a small cup of ice cream. She smiled, waved, and walked back in. It was normal enough, ordinary enough. But when investigators heard that detail later, it struck them how these tiny glimpses were the only parts of Victoria's life the outside world ever saw, while everything else was unfolding behind a closed door. Experts who reviewed the case explained how patterns of abuse rarely start with violence. They begin with neglect, with adults who refuse to meet a child's needs, with people who prioritize their own addictions, their relationships, their desires, over the small voice of a child asking for safety. Michelle, Fabian, and Jessica each played a role. Michelle with her indifference, Fabian with his chaos, Jessica with her rage. Inside that apartment, Victoria learned quickly not to cry loudly, not to ask too many questions, not to show fear. Children in these situations adapt faster than adults expect. They learn which footsteps mean trouble, which tone of voice means they should stay still, which nights feel different from others. Investigators later found Victoria's drawings in her bedroom. Stars, balloons, a birthday cake, simple things. The kind of drawings any 10-year-old might make. But detectives couldn't help noticing something else. No people were ever in them. No mother. No family. Not even herself. Her world existed on paper, but she was missing from it. The deeper detectives looked, the more the timeline revealed a pattern that escalated in the weeks before her 10th birthday. More visitors. More chaos. More late-night commotion that neighbors dismissed as grown folks' business. The adults around Victoria were unraveling, and she was trapped in the middle of their storm. And then came the week of her birthday. The house grew louder, more unstable, more dangerous. The last days of her life weren't marked by celebration or warmth. They were marked by strangers passing through, by whispers behind closed doors, and by decisions that would pull Victoria into a night she never should have faced. This chapter of the investigation left detectives asking themselves the same haunting question. How many chances did the world have to notice her pain before it became impossible to save her? The detectives would later say that the first sign was the silence. But for Tamika Johnson, it was the way the air felt when she stepped back into the hallway. Thick, unmoving, almost holding its breath. Tamika paused, not because she wanted to, but because her body reacted before her mind caught up. Her hand tightened on the stair railing. Her breath shortened. In her chest, something small and sharp shifted. 30 minutes earlier, the house had been filled with normal sounds. A running faucet, a cartoon murmuring from the living room, the soft squeak of her youngest dragging her blanket across the floor. Now, nothing. Not even the hum of the refrigerator reached her. She called out quietly at first, "Aaliyah? Baby, where you at?" Her voice floated into the silence and dissolved. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead, flickering in a way she didn't remember. Tamika swallowed, suddenly aware of how cold the floor felt beneath her feet. She took a step forward. There was a shoe near the bedroom door. Just one. Her daughter never left just one. Aaliyah always kicked them off in pairs, laughing as she ran barefoot into the kitchen. Another step. Tamika's hand shook as she reached for the doorknob. Her palm was sweating. She noticed that, yet the metal felt ice cold. Aaliyah, her voice cracked on the second syllable. Inside the room, nothing was out of place. The blanket was folded. The stuffed bear sat in its corner. The lamp still glowed softly, as if someone had just turned it on a minute before. But Aaliyah wasn't there. A pressure built behind Tamika's ribs, like her body was trying to hold back something she wasn't ready to feel. She moved quickly now, checking the bathroom, the living room, behind the couch, the laundry room. Each empty space made the house feel smaller, tighter, wrong in a way she couldn't explain. By the time she stepped back into the hallway, her breathing was uneven. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Mothers don't always react the way movies say they do. Sometimes they go quiet. Sometimes the fear moves inward, tightening everything at once. Tamika leaned her back against the wall, pressing her trembling hands to her face. Where could a 4-year-old disappear to in a matter of minutes? And more terrifying, why did the house feel like someone else had been there with them? The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her life split in two. The time before she noticed the silence and everything that came after. And the question that would haunt her and detectives long after this night was, if Aaliyah didn't leave the house on her own, then who walked out with her? By the morning of August 25th, investigators were running on cold coffee and adrenaline. The crime scene had been cleared, but the weight of it hung over the station like a fog that refused to lift. Everyone expected the evidence to give direction, something solid, something that made sense. Instead, each new report dragged the case deeper into confusion. The first shock came when detectives pulled the location data from Michelle Jackson's and Fabian Carter's phones. According to their own accounts, both claimed to have been inside that apartment during the moments leading to Victoria's death. But the cell towers told another story entirely. At the exact window of time that mattered most, their devices placed them miles away, their signals bouncing off towers on the east side of Albuquerque. The room fell quiet when the analyst presented the findings. One detective leaned forward, rubbing his hands over his face as if the truth might rearrange itself if he blinked hard enough. Because if Michelle and Fabian weren't there, then who was? Before that question even settled, another discovery landed on the table. The DNA report. A thick envelope sealed with a red clip, heavy in a way that said it would change everything. Inside, technicians had confirmed the expected profiles. Samples from Michelle. Samples tied to Fabian. Traces from Jessica Brown. But buried in the pages was a fourth profile, belonging to a male who had never been identified. A stranger who had no reason to be anywhere near a child's bedroom that night. The lead detective read the page twice. Then again, the room felt smaller, tighter. Someone muttered, "How many people were in that apartment?" No one had an answer, because the evidence wasn't lining up into a clear picture. It was scattering in every direction. As the hours passed, the case file thickened with contradictions. Michelle's claims about drugs, Fabian's claims about timing, Jessica's shifting explanations. And now, a fourth person, someone who hadn't been named, hadn't been questioned, hadn't been seen. A presence confirmed only by science. Legal advisors were brought into the conversation early. They warned that the entire foundation of the case was becoming unstable. If the prosecution built a narrative around the wrong timeline or the wrong suspects, everything could collapse in court. And behind every legal concern was a deeper, heavier truth. Victoria's final hours still weren't understood. Not fully, not honestly, not even close. One prosecutor said it quietly, not as strategy, but as grief. If this child had more than one monster around her, we may never know what she endured. For investigators, that was the moment the case shifted from difficult to something far more overwhelming. Because every new fact didn't answer a question, it created more. By the end of the day, the board in the war room looked like a shattered puzzle. Arrows, timelines, photos. Every attempt to connect the pieces led to another dead end. Yet at the center of it all was Victoria, 10 years old, trusting, bright, unaware of how many adults had failed her long before that night. If the truth is buried inside evidence that refuses to agree, how do you fight for justice when the path forward keeps pulling apart? And more importantly, who was the unknown man, and why was he anywhere near Victoria Jackson? October 2018. Early morning light spilling into the solemn chamber. The air is thick with anticipation. Families clutch one another, lawyers shuffle papers, and the quiet hum of murmured conversations is punctuated by the rhythmic tap of a gavel. This is where the story of Victoria Jackson, 10 years old, lost far too soon, moves from police files and forensic reports into the hands of justice. The courtroom doors open, and Michelle Jackson enters, her face a mask of composure that barely conceals the tension beneath. The mother of the girl at the center of this tragedy, she walks the aisle under the watchful eyes of the public, her steps echoing in a space that feels impossibly large for someone carrying the weight of such guilt. Beside her, Fabian Carter and Jessica Brown take their seats. Each carries their own version of the story, stories that would now be dissected under the unforgiving gaze of the law. The proceedings begin with the reading of charges. The words hang in the air: reckless child abuse resulting in death, tampering with evidence, criminal sexual penetration. For some in the room, they are abstract terms. For others, they are suffocating realities. The camera lingers on Victoria's extended family, their faces etched with grief, eyes red from endless nights replaying events that led to this day. Witnesses are called one by one. The first responders recount the night of the 911 call, their voices tight with emotion as they recall finding Victoria's small body, partially wrapped, partially charred, a scene that would haunt them long after the cameras were turned off. One officer admits quietly, "I kept thinking, how could someone do this to a child and not feel it?" The courtroom is still as his words settle. Forensic experts follow, laying out the details of DNA evidence, toxicology reports, and physical traces. Subtle images illustrate the evidence: photographs of documents, diagrams of the apartment layout, close-ups of gloves used in collection, but never the body itself. As each piece is presented, the tension grows. A single unidentified DNA sample, lingering on Victoria's belongings, sparks whispers among those present. Who could this be? How did they intersect with a crime? The questions hang unanswered, pressing against the walls of the room. Cross-examinations are fraught. Michelle Jackson's voice wavers as she recounts her statements to investigators, admitting her participation in her daughter's abuse, while simultaneously contradicting earlier claims. Fabian Carter maintains a calm exterior, though subtle gestures, a tightening jaw, a clenched fist under the table, betray a storm behind his eyes. Jessica Brown's demeanor is inscrutable, her eyes flicking nervously between lawyers and family members, caught in a tide of accountability and self-preservation. The narrative shifts subtly to the psychological. Experts interject, explaining the complex dynamics of coercion, complicity, and denial. Sometimes, perpetrators rationalize what they do as normal or deserved. One notes, her voice low, almost mournful. It doesn't excuse the acts, but it frames why we see such contradictions in court. The narrator amplifies this insight, asking the audience to consider the uncomfortable truth. How does human morality fracture under layers of fear, control, and twisted justification? Sentencing begins. Michelle Jackson receives 12 years for reckless child abuse resulting in death. Fabian Carter is handed 37.5 years for reckless abuse and tampering with evidence. Jessica Brown faces 44 years, but is expected to serve less than half. As the gavel falls, the emotional tension crescendos. The relief, the disbelief, the simmering questions of justice and closure. And yet, not everything is resolved. The unidentified DNA remains. The missing pieces of the story linger like shadows in the corners of the courtroom. Did the sentences fully address the scope of the crime? Could justice ever be complete when part of the truth may never be uncovered? The courtroom had emptied. Michelle Jackson had been sentenced. Fabian Carter was behind bars for decades. Jessica Brown would spend years in prison. The legal system had spoken, but for those who truly cared about Victoria Jackson, the answers were incomplete. And the night that had stolen her life remained shrouded in mystery. Outside the Albuquerque courthouse, a chill settled over the city as reporters whispered about the unresolved questions that lingered like smoke in the air. Community members gathered in small groups, some holding candles, others just standing in stunned silence, struggling to reconcile the grief with the disbelief. Victoria Jackson's name was spoken often, each mention carrying the weight of a life lost far too early. Even before that night, signs had been missed. Case files reveal multiple reports to child welfare authorities, concerns raised by neighbors, family, and even teachers. Calls flag Victoria as vulnerable, cries for intervention echoing into a system too slow, too fragmented to respond effectively. Investigators later admitted that the warnings, had they been acted on with urgency, might have altered the course of her fate. Inside the homes of those closest to Victoria, the aftermath of the crime rippled in private agony. Her younger siblings, though safe, grappled with a world that suddenly seemed unstable and unpredictable. Extended family members, desperate for closure, pored over court transcripts, forensic reports, and police statements, attempting to piece together fragments of a story that never fully made sense. Yet, amid all the known horrors, one element of the investigation remained unresolved. DNA from an unidentified male, discovered on Victoria's body. Forensic experts had confirmed it months after the crime, and despite exhaustive testing, the source remained unknown. The mystery haunted the investigators, casting a shadow over every verdict handed down. Who was this fourth party? What role had they played in the events leading to Victoria's death? And why had they never been caught? Experts weigh in, explaining how DNA evidence can both illuminate and obscure the truth. Dr. Lena Thompson, a forensic analyst, remarks, "In complex cases like this, a single unknown DNA sample can be both a clue and a riddle. It tells us something happened, but it refuses to tell us who or why." This riddle left the Jackson family and the community in suspended uncertainty, mourning not only the life of Victoria, but also the closure they desperately craved. Community advocates stepped forward, describing how Victoria's death forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about child protection services. Meetings and interviews reveal the frustrations of those on the front lines, professionals who see the patterns, who try to intervene, yet are hindered by bureaucratic delays or systemic gaps. One advocate, visibly emotional, explains, "Victoria's story shouldn't have ended this way. There were chances to stop it, and we failed her." The narrative shifts, offering glimpses into Victoria's brief life. Photographs of birthday parties, school drawings, and family gatherings appear, juxtaposed with reports of neglect and abuse. The contrast is stark. A child full of promise and joy trapped in a world that should have protected her. These moments ground the audience in the human tragedy, emphasizing that beyond the forensic reports and courtroom proceedings, Victoria Jackson was a person whose potential was stolen. Despite all the arrests, all the convictions, the presence of the unidentified male looms over the story. Detectives continue to review leads, revisit old evidence, and consult forensic databases. Each lead sparks hope, but also the chilling realization that a piece of the truth remains out of reach. The narrator's tone reflects this tension. Even after justice is served, some questions refuse to be answered. Who was involved beyond those we know? Could the actions of one unidentified individual have altered the course of Victoria's final hours? And as the community lights candles in her memory, one truth remains painfully clear. Some stories do not end neatly. They linger, unresolved, demanding that we look closer, act faster, and never forget the faces of those we failed to protect. October 24th, 2018. A day meant for celebration turned into heartbreak that no community could ignore. Victoria Jackson was 10 years old, and her life, once filled with laughter and birthday wishes, was extinguished in a house that should have been her sanctuary. But in the months and years since that night, her story has refused to fade. It haunts the corridors of courts, the halls of child protection agencies, and the hearts of those left behind. How do we honor a child lost to cruelty while confronting the uncomfortable truths her case exposes? Even as Michelle Jackson, Fabian Carter, and Jessica Brown faced the consequences of their actions, one shadow remained: an unidentified male whose DNA was found on Victoria. The question of his identity lingers, a haunting reminder that justice can sometimes feel incomplete. Investigators combed through thousands of leads, analyzed countless pieces of forensic evidence, and yet, a piece of the puzzle remains missing. The science was precise, the techniques advanced, yet human cruelty can leave gaps even the best methods struggle to close. Victoria's case forces us to confront a reality that's difficult to digest. Even with evidence in hand, some truths may never be fully revealed. The community felt the weight of failure. Calls were missed, warning signs overlooked, and now, families, neighbors, and agencies alike ask the same question. How could this happen? How could a 10-year-old girl be stripped of safety in the very place she should have been protected? Her story is not just one of tragedy. It is a mirror reflecting our collective responsibility. It asks us to examine our systems, our vigilance, and even our own moral courage. Could another Victoria have been saved if someone had acted differently? If you heard a child cry, would you listen or look away? True justice is more than a sentence. It is the promise that lessons are learned, that prevention becomes possible, that silence is never an option again. And while some perpetrators face the law, the unidentified element of that night's horror reminds us that vigilance must never waver. Victoria Jackson's voice, though silenced, calls upon us all to act. Victoria's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society. It challenges our institutions, our moral compass, and even ourselves. Her life, though brief, demands that we see, that we act, and that we remember. And so, we ask you, what will you do to help ensure that no other child falls victim to such horror? How will your voice, your actions, and your vigilance make a difference? After watching Victoria's story, what changes do you believe are necessary in your community or family to protect vulnerable children? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective matters.